Hi, this is Jack Stanley. I wanted to talk a little bit about Enrico Caruso and greed, because greed has a lot to do with this story. It deals with the later issues of Caruso's recording. The way it worked originally, when he signed his first contract with the Victor Talking Machine Company in 1904, but much better in 1907 when it was much more well illustrated, is the fact that he would have control over what was released. He would have the artistic control to say no, if indeed that was the case. And so Caruso would receive the test pressings of the record, listen to them. So would the people from the Victor Company, and they would come up to a consensus whether it should be released or not. More often than not, it was released. However, there were some exceptions where they were held or just basically marked to be destroyed. Once Caruso dies, there are a number of masters in the vaults of recordings that he made that were substandard, that he would never have approved. However, starting in around 1924, 23 actually, the Victor Company started issuing in double-sided form. I always never know which way to go with these things. The Red Seal record. Now, that had been a one-sided affair until the early 1920s. And then they fell victim to what everything else had been, double-sided. And so Caruso came out in double-sided form. A number of his recordings never released before, a number of those made in 1918, 1919, 1920, were released posthumously and right up through into the early 1930s. I've got some Caruso Red Seals that say RCA on the bottom, even though they have the Victor label, which is rather confusing. So I'm gathering it's right around the time of 1931-32. The thing is about all of this is that a number of records that never should have been released were. And it's kind of a crime that recordings that were really bad were released. It was all for dinero. Got to remember, RCA was looking for any way to make money. And if they have a dead artist like Caruso, and they've got some unissued stuff by this dead artist, by golly, they were going to release them, whether they were good or bad. Almost sounding like the Patty records of 1905 and 1906. They weren't great, but they were Patty. Nonetheless, they even went so far as dubbing a lot of the early recordings with the modern orchestra, trying to sell those. They had the Caruso picture record. They did everything to use his image, use his history to make money. And sadly, in the 1930s, mainly, a lot of really bad stuff made by Caruso was released. And, well, nonetheless, most people listen to them and say, these are not good. Well, yeah, they weren't good. That's why they weren't released before. But for those of us who have our two-sided Carusos that were all made in the 20s into the 30s, in fact, some recordings of Caruso were in print from 1902 until the 1950s, which is incredible when you think about it. We enjoy them. I listen to some of those records and I say, my God, he wasn't feeling good here. You know, the last recording session that Caruso had, that week he was suffering from a chest cold, and so that had a profound effect on a lot of his singing, and you can really hear it. He really sounds sick when he makes some of those records. I mean, it's a glorious sick, but still, You can hear him breathing very heavily, and especially in that recording of La Juive. He sounds dreadful. You can hear the raspiness of his breathing apparatus. Painful to listen to at times. But nonetheless, when you listen to those later recordings made by RCA, issued by RCA in the 1920s and 30s, remember there was more an element of greed than of artistic nature. The simple truth is, it's greed over artistic nature. Artistic nature lost, and RCA made some recordings by Caruso that Caruso would never have allowed to be released. Yeah, that happens to us all. So just remember that when you listen to those early records. There is an area where all of a sudden a lot of refuse comes out that never should have.